Hello everyone, wherever you are and whatever time it is for you, welcome to my talk on Cypress Component Testing for Vite. My name is Jessica Sachs. I am a staff engineer at a medtech startup called Path AI. I'm from Boston in America, and I recently left Cypress, but I'm still involved as a Cypress ambassador. I worked at Cypress for 2.5 years, joining in March 2020. I led the team that designed, built, and shipped Cypress Component Testing in Cypress 10. I'm a Faker.js team member and the occasional contributor to the Vue and Vite ecosystem. I'm loosely involved with the development of Vitest as an occasional contributor as well. Cool. Now, what is Cypress Component Testing? Cypress Component Testing provides a testable component workbench for you to quickly build and test any component, no matter how simple or complex. Cypress is a browser-based test runner, and as of Cypress 10, you now have the ability to fully test drive an individual component's logic, including its CSS. I'll show you what I mean. Practicing a testable component-driven development workflow enables you to break down your work into more manageable chunks, ultimately resulting in components that are developed more mindfully. This is what Cypress Component Testing looks like in Vuetify, which is the Vue equivalent of Material UI. In this test, Cypress is testing out Vuetify's canvas-based vColor Picker component. On the left, we have the command log, which shows all of the commands that have been executed in this test. They're roughly equivalent to, one line of code per command. And then on the right, you have what would be called the application under test if you were end-to-end testing. Instead is called the component under test, which is our beautiful color picker. And I like to show instead of tell, and my goal in this talk is to give you a feel for what it's like to develop using Cypress Component Testing. So to do this, we will be test driving a simple counter component with a min, max, and initial value. I will also show off how flexible Cypress Component Testing is when it comes to ingesting your Vite config. We're talking markdown files, we're talking svelte files, JSX. It handles anything that you have configured in your Vite config. So let's open it up. Okay, heading over to the codes. So we're going to be working in Vue today, though it actually doesn't matter because Cypress will handle anything that you have configured in your Vite config. So pnpm cypress open -- component. This template is based off of the Vitest, not Vitest, Vitest component template. I'm going to use Chrome version 105. We're going to start Cypress component testing in that version, and we're going to look at what component tests exist already. So we have this counter component test. We can either look at it, so let's do that, and see what tests already exist. So I've already written a few tests here. I've written a few tests that check out that we have a decrement button, that we have an increment button. It's very small probably for you guys, so let's make it bigger. Let's make my face smaller. Okay, that we have an increment and a decrement button. And you can see that when you click them, nothing happens. So we probably want to write a test for that because we're in a counter. So whenever you hover over the spec name in the test runner itself in Cypress, you can open it in your IDE. If you don't have your IDE configured, it will ask you to configure it. Cypress can be very smart. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hide the file explorer, and we're going to write a test that says that the counter decrements the value when the minus button is clicked. let's call it the decrement button because I'm calling it decrement everywhere else. So not only should the decrement selector be visible, but when we click it, and we should, let's call it the, I don't know, I want to make sure that the value is incremented, right? So anything inside of this, data test ID counter. So we're going to get the counter selector. Let's implement that really quick. I'm going to split my screen. I like to have my tests running at the same time as my development. So I'm going to get the counter selector. You can watch the errors pile up, and I want to isolate using only, which is a method on it in many test runners, including Cypress. We're going to say counter selector. You can see the Vite plugin errors, which is pretty cool, kind of pipe up, and how fast that rerun is. So now we have the counter selector, and we can see Cypress telling us, hey, it's the entire node here. And we're going to click it. We're going to should have text. It should be increment +1. So, initial +1. Perfect. So we're expecting that this node should have text, but it was 4. We actually want it to contain text. You see that extra space there? We don't want to have this extra space. And at this point, you should be feeling like this is kind of like a test IDE. So let's command click into the counter and implement an increment function. Did we say we're doing increment or decrement? 1 second. What does the test say? The test says decrement. So let's implement the decrement function. So const decrement. I think I made a mistake actually in my test, but so we're going to say value, .value, probably should have named it better, minus. Let's name that counter. And Vite is reloading using a Cypress Vite plugin, the test runner over here. And then we want to make sure that when you click the minus button, and I can see that it's the minus button because I have a nice fancy plugin. When you click the minus button, we're going to call decrement. Nice. Cool. Text was 3, so decrement is working correctly, but my test is actually wrong. The test should be -1. And perfect, it does contain 3. Very nice. Now let's do the same thing for increment. So let's copy and paste the test. It increments the value when the increment button is clicked. Let me move my face over to an unused part of the screen. Very nice. Let's go and say everywhere it says decrement, increment selector should contain initial +1. Oh, did I implement it yet? No, I did not. Copy, increment, counter value ++, at click, increment. And that looks good. And I can play with it. Oh, very nice. Oh, should I be able to go into the negatives? I'm not sure. I think counters generally have the idea of a min, optionally probably, and a max. So let's go ahead and implement those things. So let's say in the test here, not only should it have a decrement button, let's grab these onlys and take them off. Boom, boom. It should not be able to go below the minimum value. Perfect. So let's mount initial, let's mount min to be negative, let's mount min to be 0. And implement that. So we're going to set initial to be 1, and the min, actually set initial to be 0. Let's do the minimum number of clicks. We're going to grab the decrement selector. We're going to click on that. So do we have, that's working fine. Okay, all the tests are passing still. Let's isolate this test. And we've clicked the decrement selector, and we should not be able to do this. So when we get the counter selector, it should have, sorry, we want contain text. It should contain text 0. It should not contain text -1. That's funky. Cool. All right, so now let's add those gates, those logic gates here. So we only want to decorate if props.min is, we only want to decrement if counter.value is greater than, or no, just greater than props.min. Is that correct? Why is it yelling? Unnecessary if after condition. Object is possibly undefined. I think my TypeScript language server is not working correctly. So I'm going to reload this window. Because I think this should work. Yeah. And so now we're going to do, oh. I guess greater than min doesn't feel right to it. So we can add some defaults versus actually fixing the type error. Sorry, min is going to be 0, max is going to be, I don't know, like 10,000, 2,000. Counter value minus minus, unnecessary after condition. I guess the linting rules that come with Vitest do not like this. Perfect. And then the inverse of this is going to be counter value plus plus. Very nice, increment and decrement. Now let's start to do some weird stuff. Let's add some utility classes. Let's add hidden. So you see there's no more plus button. It's there still. And let's go into the spec file again, and let's like run this one. Oh, no, we do have a decrement. What about the increment button? Well, it's already telling us that the element isn't visible. And all of our increment button tests are failing because the user is trying to click it, but the hidden utility class I was using has display none on it. If we fix the CSS, everything passes. And it took 376 milliseconds to run all of these tests. It's not as fast as Vitest. It is not as fast as Vitest. However, it does process all of your styles, and it does run in a real browser. It makes complete sense to me that it would not be as fast. I don't see a world in which Cypress would ever be as fast as a headless test runner. Except for, actually, let's write the maximum test. Except for when you think of snapshot testing. When I adapted Vuetify's component tests from Jest to Cypress, Vuetify was using to match snapshot, which writes to the disk. And when you write your snapshots to disk, it actually takes a bit of time. And adding Cypress Component Testing ended up speeding up Vuetify's component tests as a whole, which was shocking to me, but is what happened. So even though you might feel a little weird about, let's see, max is 1,000. Even though you might feel a little weird about having slower tests than could be possible, I think that having all of the development tools, having debuggers available is absolutely worth it. And I do all of my development styles, tests, logic. I do all of my development purely on this canvas in an isolated fashion. It's pretty cool. And especially when you think of all of the loaders that are going on under the hood here. So let's take it back to Vite. Let's finish this test. Increment selector. Whoops. Increment selector should contain text. Let's see, initial and max should contain text 1,000. Let's go back to Cypress here. It was 1,001. Let's fix it. Go to counter. Perfect. No. Did I break it? If the counter value is less than props.max. Perfect. So simple, yet so easy to break. And it's so nice when you can actually just see it visually there. All right, so from there, let's show off some other cool things like this plus button here. This is called Create New Spec. You can create from component, and you'll notice that these are all nice view files because the project has detected that it's view. But I'm going to show you some weird stuff you can do. So you can grab one of the about pages. So Vitest will grab markdown pages and it will render them for you as components. It will actually create routes and stuff. So this is a markdown component that actually works with view components. Here's our counter. Here is our counter from earlier. To prove that, and to prove that it does or doesn't work, I'm going to comment out the logic inside of our increment and decrement buttons. And you'll see that the about page gets hot reloading. That is super cool. Let's go to About MD. You can see our about counter, and we can start to write tests inside of the about size spec. Because it's a JavaScript file, it's complaining about global types. And we could start to write tests like get data test ID about counter and see that our stuff is correctly hooked up. I have never seen an application or a test runner that can test markdown files like this. Vitest probably can with no problem, but I've never been able to see something that renders it like this. It's so cool to me. All right, so wrapping up, I have a few more things to say in the keynote and then we should be good. And they are concerning Vitest versus Cypress versus Jest. So I'm going to skip over this section because basically Cypress just acts as a Vite plugin. Let me move my little face. There we go. Basically, Cypress just acts as a Vite plugin, and the entry point is a loader that dynamically imports each spec file. So it does a glob search for something that matches the spec pattern. Cypress uses .sci.js so as not to conflict with Vitest. Moving my face again. versus Jest. So we are giving the extension of spec and test to Vitest because you probably need a node-based runner and a browser-based runner. You can use Vitest for its speed, its lightning fast speed, and you can use Cypress for its ability to test thoroughly, test CSS. So I use Vitest for unit tests and business logic and headless composables. I use Cypress for components that render, and I do not use Jest anymore. Some history and thanks. I would go over this in more detail, but I'm out of time. All I would say is that Cypress is highly inspired by the creation of Vite. Its current architecture is strongly influenced by Vite, and without Vite's existence, it is very likely that Cypress Component Testing would have been very Webpack specific. And for that, I am very thankful for the work that Evan did to create Vite and the Vite ecosystem. So thank you.